Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fun for Teachers Ramsden Project webinar about building global communities. We're so happy you've joined us today. It may seem a little funny to you right now that you're listening and you may have noticed that you're not able to talk. And that's because we expect a lot of people today on today's webinar, and we want to make sure that that we can kind of control the volume, because if we have 50 people all with their microphones on, it becomes very challenging. So the mute is automatically on, but it's not because we don't want to hear from you. We really do. There is a question box on your screen. And so if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, if you could please just add those to the question box, that would be great. Okay. Even if it's not a question, you can add it there. We'll be monitoring that question box throughout the webinar. And if it's a question that as we're in the just right spot to answer it, we will. And if not, we'll try to hold questions to the end. If for some reason we have so many questions and we run out of time, I will follow up with each one of you individually. So know that your questions today will be answered. So with that being said, welcome. We're so excited to have you today. And we have been preparing for our webinar as much as you can prepare for a question and answer kind of panel. And this is really our first webinar as the Ramsden Project. My name is Liza Eaton, and I am the new director of programs for the Ramsden Project. One of the things that you may know this already, but Ramsden launched this year as part of Fun for Teachers. And our goal is really about trying to inspire teachers, continue to inspire fellows post-fellowship by connecting them with each other so that fellows and teachers can leverage the deep well of knowledge that is within each of you. And so part of our pilot is trying to leverage social media. And so this webinar is one of our strategies. And so we bring to you today four really fantastic fellows who are going to share a little bit of their practice with you about building global communities. This whole topic came about because of a fellow's interest. Saul, who is supposed to be here today but was unable to make it, has been really excited about this idea of connecting his students to other students. They may be students outside their community, but in the United States, even in his town, or they might be students across our country, or maybe across the world. But he feels like that is so important because it builds empathy. And so in getting to know Saul, we cooked up this idea that we would try to pool some of the wealth of knowledge that fellows have about building global communities. And so I reached out to a number of fellows, and here you have them today to tell you their stories. I hope that by the end of today's webinar, you feel inspired. That something that you heard today makes you feel like, oh, I could try that. That's something I want to do. And so that's our goal by the end of today's webinar. Again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them right there in the chat box. Okay, I'm going to try a little feature called a poll. And so that's going to change your screen in a minute, and it will give us a sense of who's in the room. So the first poll that I'm going to ask you to respond to is, what grades do you teach? So you should see your screen change, and if you could click on as many of those boxes as apply to you, you should be able to click on multiple ones and push submit. That'd be great. Just take a minute to respond to the poll. right, just 10 more seconds to respond to the poll. All right, I'm going to close it and share the results with you. So this is who's in the room. That's a pretty nice spread. We've got, looks like some people outside of classroom teaching, and then a spread of other people who are teaching. So that's really nice. And the beauty of our panel today, our fellows, is that we have representatives of each one of these groups. So that's really great. Okay, I'm going to hide the results. You may see my screen for a second, and then I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint again. Okay, great. So I think we've gone over most of this information. I just want to make sure you know that if you see in your little control panel a hand raise, it's really hard for me to track that. So if you could just put anything you need to say to us in the questions, that'd be great. Okay. Could somebody just write me a little note or type, yeah, I can hear you? That would be great, because webinars are a little funny. They're sort of one-sided in this way. Just type in a question and push respond. Okay, great. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. So at the bottom of this, it looks like people can hear us. So again, if there's any technical problems today, just let me know. At the bottom of this slide is a brief agenda, just so you know what to expect. I think our agenda, our webinar will last at the most 45 minutes, maybe around 30. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves in 1 minute. That's why you're here. So we're going to start there, and then I will have a little bit of panelist discussion. So I've prepared some questions, and then we'll also add some of your questions in the mix so that we feel like we're really getting some concrete ideas that we can take home from this webinar. Okay. So that's our agenda for today, and here's our presenters. Catherine Craven, Saul Fusner, Donna Gradle. I hope I'm saying your name right, Donna. Carly Imhoff, and Dory Moore. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, share their name, the grade and subject they teach, so you have a sense of who they are, and also to share just briefly about one project where you've connected students with others, with their global peers. Just a note, unfortunately, Saul wasn't able to attend today. So, Catherine, I'm going to ask you to jump in first, if you don't mind.
Sure. So my name is Kate Craven, and I'm a library media specialist at Ashford School. I teach along with Carly and Dory, who you'll hear from in just a moment. We work with grades pre-K through 8. And one of the ways that we've built global community is through MAPS, or GIS. So as a library media specialist, one of my focuses is on helping students practice their research skills. So we had started to use GIS to sort of connect, to find out where things were in the world. And after my Fund for Teachers Fellowship, I started to transition from using maps to learn about the world to using maps to help students collaborate with others. And we got really lucky to connect with a wonderful school in Germany through the German-American Partnership Program, or GAP, which is a great organization that Carly, I think, will talk a little bit more about. And together we mapped on how our countries were each meeting the indicators of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we actually got to travel with our students to Germany. And what you're looking at on the screen is all different surveys of questions that students had asked. So students might want to learn about, say, clean water. So every time that they saw a water fountain, they'd put a pin down and take a picture of it. And together we created these interactive maps of where things were, and we got a really good picture of how Germany was meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And then on the other side, a few months ago, we had our German friends who came to visit us, and we created this same story map, but here in Ashford, Connecticut. And it was just a really cool picture of how each of our communities were meeting the global goals.
Great. Kate, could you tell us, what does GIS stand for?
So it stands for Geographic Information Systems. Basically, the way that I think about it, because it sounds really, I don't know, it's sort of an intimidating phrase, but basically it's taking pictures or putting pinpoints of data and representing it on a map. So if you were looking at, I don't know, a picture of Connecticut, you would see a pin over Ashford, and you might see in Ashford, we have like a forest or something like that. It's a free software that all schools are welcome to use.
Great. I'm seeing a pretty big spread here in questions like protected trees in nature and then gender equality. I'm curious, how did you support students to generate these questions? Where'd they come from?
So we had this, we came up with a whole handout that basically had students looking at what the global goals were overall. And then it broke down the process of, okay, I'm most interested in, say, clean water. Well, what can I look at as far as clean water? So what can I look at that would help me know whether or not a country was meeting clean water? So would that look like running water fountains? Would that look like flushing toilets? What pinpoints of data am I going to use to help me answer that question?
Okay, great. Thanks, Kate, for giving some insights. And if you have some questions for Kate, you can jump in and ask some questions, and we'll come back to her in a minute. And we're going to move on to, unfortunately, not Saul. And then, Donna, you're up next. If you could take a minute to introduce yourself and talk about a way that you've connected students to their global peers.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Donna Grotto, and I teach environmental science and innovative research at Broken Arrow High School in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I've had the opportunity over the last 8 years to connect my students with classrooms, researchers, and university students from Kenya. And it all centered around a project that we named Aqua for Tharaka. The main aim of the project was to help to provide clean water and also protein to areas in Kenya that had high protein deficiency percentages, particularly in young children. And the project was designed so that it was intertwined in my curriculum as the students were spent an entire year designing aquaponic systems, and then we would test them throughout the year, and then we took our research from what we did in our own class, and then I actually took a team of students and traveled to a remote region of Kenya called the Tharaka region, and we actually built a large-scale aquaponic system at a neighborhood orphanage, and also which serviced the village and the children in that orphanage, providing tilapia for them and also vegetables through the aquaponic system. So it was a long-term project where we also sent teams over that actually trained the orphans and the villagers on how to raise fish. And then eventually we partnered with MIT and invented a low-cost sustainable fish food and went back to the area and taught the students, the orphans and the villagers, how to create and make their own fish food so that it's a sustainable project.
Donna, that's an amazing project. I'm sorry I said your name wrong in the beginning. I apologize for that. I'm curious, when you think about what are some ways that you've been able to involve your students in this project? How have you connected them with the communities and people and maybe kids in Kenya?
Well, we've done it through several avenues. Initially, we did a lot of Skyping. We Skyped about 3 or 4 different schools in Kenya in different areas, not necessarily out where we built our facility because they don't have any electricity, but to other areas that did have electricity, because initially we wanted to collaborate with students from other schools there and allow them to join in on our project. And that was difficult to do at the time, but we've advanced a little. We also created a partnership with an international research center in Nairobi. It's called ICT, which is the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology. And several of the professors there that are studying ways that they can utilize insects for agriculture and human consumption. We worked with them, particularly when we started trying to create our fish food, because our main protein source was going to be an insect. And then we've also worked with the Interclimate Center, Research Center in Nairobi, And by coming up with a lot, climate is huge when you're trying to farm anything. So that was through Skyping, it's through, you know, them messaging back and forth. Some of them actually got and, you know, traveled to Kenya with me. I've had 3 teams of students that have traveled there. So they did face-to-face and interacted with students and the research professors. So those are the main ways that we've been able to connect.
Wow, that's really cool. Thanks. Great. So I noticed you joined us. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Let's scooch back to your slide, Saul. Would you just mind introducing yourself? Just share your name, what you do, and then ways that you've just briefly 1 or 2 sentences about how you've connected students with their global peers.
Okay, I'm Saul Fusner. I currently am the director of creative writing at a arts magnet school called Educational Center for the Arts in New Haven, Connecticut. When I had my fellowship, I was a history teacher at New Haven Academy. And in the city of New Haven, there are a lot of students who just sort of think the whole world is their local neighborhood. So I was very interested in bringing some of the places that we studied to them through linking them with people their age from the same places. And so we back in 2012, when students still used email, I had some Native American Studies students who sort of had email pen pal relationships with students from the Native American Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then when we were studying the Northern Irish Troubles, we linked some students from Nendrum College. College being actually a high school, it's called Nendrum College because in the UK they use that term in Northern Ireland. So linking students through Google Hangouts between Northern Ireland and New Haven. But all this work was around sort of units we were studying and getting kids to talk to people from the places. It was never really sustained long term. And what I'm trying to do now and get some ideas for is doing maybe more of a long-term project, like maybe something closer to what Don is doing, although that Donna's work is incredible and involves an awful lot of planning with the other countries. What we are doing now is we've had some interest from Boise, Idaho, to link our writing classes with their writing classes and trying to do some sort of project where the students write about place so that students in New Haven can learn about students in Boise and what their world is like, and vice versa.
Great. Thanks, Saul. Great description of some of the ways you've connected students to other students. Carly, you're up. Talk a little bit, introduce yourself, share a little bit about how you've connected students to their global peers.
So I teach kindergarten through 8th grade science and enrichment. So most of my day is spent with younger students. So how we connect is through virtual partnerships. And there's a lot of different platforms that you can use to make those relationships happen. You can either make those relationships happen with teachers you haven't met but meet through these platforms, or if you meet a teacher on a trip like Fun for Teachers or some other professional development opportunity, it's always great to connect with those classes too. So on the left side of the slide, there's a picture of a bunch of my students who are making short videos about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to share with our partner class in Uruguay. And they were not just learning about the goals, but they were also using little kid robotics to sort of make prototypes of inventions they could use to help us reach those goals by 2030. And by using the platform in that picture, which is flipgrid.com, the students were able to use an asynchronous exchange. So we didn't have to worry about the time difference. They would post short videos and your partner class posts short videos in response. On the right hand of the screen are my fourth graders talking about alternative energy, and they are in the middle of a live exchange with a class in Nigeria, and that is our partner class through a program called Empatico. Both of these are completely free for classrooms and are both nonprofits. So Empatico is a platform where you sign up, say when you're available, and say what type of lessons you would like to teach, and they partner you with a teacher somewhere in the world who's available at the same times and also wants to teach the same things. So you can either use their lessons or you can make your own lessons. It can be as easy or involved as you want, but mostly I was going to be teaching these science standards anyway, and teaching them with a teacher who is in Nigeria and teaching the same things just made the lesson much richer for everyone involved. And mostly we taught each other science content and shared about our communities, but we also taught each other silly songs, and my lights are on a timer. We also would teach each other silly songs and sometimes just hang out. Once we even just had a dance party together. So it's really fascinating as we're watching our smartboard and their teacher is holding up his smartphone and recording his kids, and we're all connecting and talking about different science questions together. We've also used platforms like Skype in the past, Google Hangouts. It really doesn't matter what you use, just use something you're comfortable with. And then these opportunities are there, and they're just as easy as teaching a normal lesson in your classroom. In fact, maybe it's even more easy because you're sort of co-teaching. You're just co-teaching with a teacher who's not in the classroom. Last year, we also went school-wide with Empatico, which made it even more fun because then not only do I have relationships in my classroom with our partner classes, but I could talk to my colleagues in my school about their partner classes in Pakistan or South Africa and see what those classes were like and the relationships their kids were building. So I would encourage everyone to do it because you can do it in a 15-minute mini lesson. You could do it in a 45-minute full lesson. It works with however you teach.
Yeah. I like how you bring up this program that's free, Empatico, as a tool to really connect you with potential global peers, because I suspect is probably a barrier for some teachers. Great. Okay, so Dory, you're up.
Hi. So I teach 7th and 8th grade, also in Ashford, Connecticut, and I also teach, I teach science, and then I teach tech ed in the specials rotation, just some various classes of that. So we started off with an underwater robotics project, and we were just making underwater robots in the classroom, and it was such a fun experience that I wanted to bring it to my science instruction. So we turned it into a project where the students designed underwater robots to address a biodiversity issue. This was things like oil spills, how can we use a robot to clean those up, plastic in our waterways or trash, and then it led us into invasive species, particularly the lionfish. And iRobot, the manufacturers of Roomba, have created in prototype stage, I think they're trying to gamify tackling the lionfish invasion with robots that can electrocute lionfish, and then local restaurants can use the lionfish as a product to serve their clientele. And so they're trying to make it like a fun game. So my lights are also on a timer. So our students designed robots to address some of those biodiversity issues, and particularly the lionfish one stood out to us. And so with a team of colleagues, they found a PD opportunity in Bermuda through the BIOS, where they met up with a school in Bermuda who also was interested in the lionfish invasion and studying the effects on the island. And so our students designed a robot directly in this slide. You can see our student with the underwater robot and designing it to collect data and use mapping software to pinpoint the invasion. And they went and met up with the school in Bermuda, and the students worked together to collect the data points together. And the underwater robots that we use are kits that you can build from. It's just PVC pipe, and it's through a program called Sea Perch that's sponsored by the Navy, so it's a nonprofit. We received our supplies through a grant, so it was free to get the materials. And then we will add things to it like 3D printed software, which we've also gotten through a grant. So the students are identifying biodiversity issues, locally and globally, and meeting up with teams from other schools through that project.
We have a good question here from the group, and you were talking about this a little bit, Dory. One of our participants wants to know how do you source your international contacts? And I guess I would broaden that to not just your international contacts, but also your national contacts. Like there's also real power in connecting students across our country, as you know, where there are some divisions in our country, and so how do you find, I mean, clearly, Carly, you've talked about Empatico as a tool, but Dory and Donna and Saul, what was your experience trying to source your contacts so that you can connect?
Well, just for me, it's three different ways, actually. And one is the Northern Irish contact was arranged through an organization called Facing History and Ourselves. And they're an organization that helps teachers teach about like the most difficult histories, like the Holocaust, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, etc. So they connected us with teachers they knew. That was for Northern Ireland. For the school on the Navajo reservation, that was just like a personal contact. Or I'm sorry, right outside the Navajo reservation. That was a personal contact of an administrator in my building. But for the Boise, Idaho thing, that was through another educational organization called Narrative 4 that promotes storytelling for the purpose of empathy between students. And they arranged that one. So largely for me, it's been like just finding the right organizational, finding like educational organizations that I'm working with anyway, and then asking them who else they work with, and then trying to make connections to those people.
Yeah, great. Donna, what about you? How did you get connected with the community in Kenya?
Well, I made a trip in 2002 and developed some relationships and kept in touch with the people. And then actually when, my first fellowship was specifically aimed at going over and creating these relationships. So I visited several different schools and different research centers, and most, in my experience has been, particularly with the Kenyans, that they just embrace wanting to collaborate or do anything with Americans and American students. So I had several people that were from America that were traveling with me, and then several people from Kenya, and we kind of connected, and they connected me with, research centers and different people. And so a lot of it was just personal and legwork. And it was a lot of help having my fellowship. That was a big purpose of it.
Great. And then Dory, I think you said this, but how did you connect your students with the ones in Bermuda?
Through professional development in a science research place that offers outreach in Bermuda.
So a little like Saul, you start working with organizations and you start asking, just sort of network.
Yes. Yep.
And then Carly, you've used Empatico as a tool to really connect a lot of students in your school.
Yes, but all the tools I mentioned also have matching capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on Flipgrid, you could do it that way. Or if you did Mystery Skype, there's hundreds of ways.
That's great. Okay, good. And then what was the name of the program that Kate used, the GIS program?
So it was, sorry, I took myself off camera, but it was the German-American Partnership Program, or GAP. And basically it's a partnership between the United States and Germany through our Department of State. And what you can do is you sign on, you create a profile about your school, and then they'll actually match you with a school in Germany. And often you can do just a virtual exchange, but often your German partner school will actually want to do an in-person exchange. So it's this wonderful opportunity to connect with a different culture and a different community in this reciprocal exchange program.
Great, awesome. So I just want to ask the folks in the room, how many of you, and I'm going to send you a poll question, how many of you in your classrooms have connected your students with their global peers? Now, when I say global, that could be people, even students connecting with a community that they're not familiar with in your same town. But it could also be like in Kenya across the world. So take a minute. How many have you connected your students with your global peers? Take a minute to respond. Just click one and then push submit. Give it about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. So get your votes in. Okay, so here's the results of our poll. Looks like we've got some newbies to connecting their students with their global peers, and then we also have some people with some experience in this, so that's great. We've already been responding to some of the questions in the question box. So if you have questions that you really want answered, make sure to use the question tool. Wait 1 second, sorry. And then I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to some other questions here. And I think just a good place to start would just be, how can we get started with this work? Like, you know, in some ways, thinking about finding an international partner feels really overwhelming. What are some other things that we can do to get started with this? Any of our fellows willing to share?
Oh, I'll go.
Yep.
So really we started with just an idea to use in just the classroom. So it was just, I went to a PD, learned how to build the robots. It was low cost and it was just a fun idea. So I came up with the idea to just do it with my students. And then from there, I wanted to make it a tangible thing that the students could apply to actually solving biodiversity issues, not just building prototypes, which then connected us to looking for professional development opportunities to kind of expand on that. And then that connected us to another school to work with. And then that connected to developing the partnership with a school in Bermuda. So it just started with in the classroom and then expanded beyond as we kept looking for the next level.
Great. Someone else, what advice do you have about how we can get started?
I would also add, find some colleagues in your building that you can work with. It's a lot more fun that way. And also then you have support if something's going wrong. You have people who will cheerlead you on. And also then when you have success, there's lots of people there to share in it. So I would highly recommend collaborating with the people who are right next to you before reaching out, and also collaborating with people around the globe.
Great, that's good advice.
And I would say, in my case, you know, the whole idea came from a class discussion, and it was initiated by my students. I teach problem solving and project-based learning, and so they were used to doing different types of impactful projects around our community and around the country, but we had never tried an attempt anything international, and they wanted to. They just asked, why aren't we? And I said, well, I don't know, let's do it. And so we started in the classroom, and then we began by asking the questions, what will we need? Where do we want to go? How can we get this? And just the students started brainstorming. And then, like Carly said, pulling in colleagues, that's incredibly important. And then pulling in community members, because there were a lot of people in our community that helped, because it was a pretty expensive project.
Yeah. Donna, I heard Dory say something really similar. She started with this really interesting project that got kids fired up in the classroom, and then she ended up finding global peers for them. So that's interesting that two of you sort of started that way. Good. Well, there's a question from the group, because you can imagine that there's, you know, other than finding your global peers, another challenge might be having some admin support for these kinds of projects. Have any of you had to struggle to get admin support? And if so, how have you negotiated that?
I think Kate should answer this one.
Yeah.
Kate, are you there? She might have had to mute herself for a minute. She's got
I
a,
had to mute myself for a minute. Sorry, can you re-ask the question?
So we were talking about getting admin support. How did you get our principal really enthusiastic about Germany?
Oh, so we wound up actually so I sort of hinted at it for a couple of months before we actually broached the idea of taking children to Germany. So every time he'd come in, we'd be like, hey, how cool would it be? And then we wound up actually inviting him to come along to our first exchange, which turned out to be the best way ever to get him enthusiastic and involved. It's now become the thing that he brings up at like every faculty meeting. Every time he meets a new person, it comes up. And so I guess my answer is getting him really, really involved, and inviting him to be part of the events, and just helping him be, sorry, I have a crying baby, and helping him to feel like he had a real role in our partnership has made it so that it is his crowning achievement for our school.
great. Any others want to address that question? I think another good
I
one.
will.
Okay, go ahead, Donna.
When we first started our project, there was not a lot of administrative support, and there was no space to, test our things, and no materials, no funds. But the students were so passionate about it that they really took it out of the classroom, and they started talking about it, telling their parents, and then going to places because we didn't have any equipment. So they would go to the local stores and say, can you donate some PVC pipe? Can you do this? Would you be willing to do this? And they would come up to school on the weekends. They would stay after school. They came up over holidays. And so it really generated a buzz in our community to the point where it became something that, the administrators like, I need to see what you're doing because everybody's asking me these questions and I don't know what you're doing. And when I first began my question, I went to him and I said, here's what we're thinking about doing. And he kind of said, oh gosh, like nobody's ever done this before. And I said, well, all I need to know is, are you going to stop me? Like, that's the big question. If I start, are you going to stop me? And he said, no, go for it. But I mean, it wasn't embraced, but it wasn't stopped. So I wasn't discouraged and I wasn't encouraged, but the students and the community, once they, realized what we were doing and the word got out, it just kind of snowballed, and it was fantastic.
Great. Are there other barriers you all have encountered in trying to do this work? So admin is one. I think finding connections is another one. Are there other barriers that you've encountered? Funding. So some of you have talked about funding a little bit.
And to funding. Oh, Dory, go for it.
No, yours is related. I'll tell mine after. Go ahead.
To speak towards funding, our school is a Title I school, so we need to make sure that everything is incredibly cheap or free. I know that Kate's probably muted, so I'll speak to her. The Germany trip last time was only $500 per student, including airfare, because we were able to get so many grants. The Bermuda trip is completely free for students who want to be able to go and apply what they've been learning in Dory's classes. And then virtual exchanges are almost always free. So I just wouldn't want anyone to think that going to another country is prohibitively expensive. If you're planning it yourself and you're just doing it as part of your curriculum, it can be dirt cheap.
Just have to be a little resourceful.
Very resourceful.
Yeah, which teachers are. Dory, did you want to add?
So that's the resourcefulness is what I'll add on to. So one of the big barriers that we ran into is we don't have a pool at our school, and testing underwater robots, it helps to have a pool. And so what I found was perseverance really pays off. We had reached out to local community centers and they all wanted to charge like $100 an hour to use just the lane. But then as I used community connections and brought up our problem to other people, we actually found an indoor pool that's unused during the winter months because it's not heated, and we can go for free at any time that we want. And it's located right in town. So I feel like this could be a metaphor maybe for other things that where when you first see a cost or there's problems, there's usually people connected that can find an answer. But you just need to make sure that like people know about the problem and what you're trying to address. Because I never knew about this random pool in town that's tucked away at a corner, but I go all the time now. So I think that's, the perseverance and letting people know what barriers you're facing is helpful.
That's great. Yeah, I heard Donna speak to some of those same things, Dory. And she also said, and I got my students to do it. Right. So those 3 things are really great. We're going to take one last question, and that is, what advice do you have for us to get, not just to get started, but what's a last piece of advice you have for us?
Okay, I'll talk. So I agree with Carly. It's all about your colleagues, and it's all about being vocal about what you're trying to do, and not, I guess, in a brash way, but just in an excited way. So just rallying support and getting excitement going, and it helps to have those supportive colleagues, because my colleagues have changed me forever in such a positive way, where when I first started teaching, I never would have thought it was possible to do any of this stuff. And so finding like-minded people that are willing to just kind of come up with some crazy ideas, because I laughed when I heard about zapping lionfish with a robot, and now our students are on their way to building a new version of it. So it's kind of cool.
Any others? What last advice?
Donna said it, but I think she said it in a different way. But I think starting from your students' interests, starting from your students' questions, that being your jumping off point towards whatever you do.
Great. Thanks, Saul. You're cutting out there in the end, but I think what you said was getting your students' interest is at the core.
Yeah, and starting from their questions. What is it that they're curious about? Yeah. And then going from there.
Great. Any others?
Yeah, I would say that's extremely important because, if the students have passion about it, it's going to flow out and people are going to be interested. Like, what are you doing? Why are these students so excited about this? And, the entire time it's tied to our curriculum. What we did is embedded in that. So the students are learning. And I will tell you that changed the scores that I got in my classroom. They were so much higher because the students now were applying principles and they were excited about it. And if we worked over, then I said, well, you gotta, do this or study this. And they were just more than willing because they didn't want to lose this project. And it's, evolved into many other projects that have been much easier, but just as effective because the student interest is there. And that's huge.
Great. That's a great note to end on. Building student interest. There are a few other questions that have been asked by group members, and all of the questions that have gone unanswered are about really concrete things like, I want the link to this, and what are the grants you used, and that kind of thing. And so I'll commit to putting together a 1-pager of all of the resources these fellows have mentioned. And of course, you as an audience, if you have additional things to add, please respond when I send this out to all of you so that you can let me know if you have things that we can add to it. So we'll create sort of like a 1-pager of resources, which include technology, links to organizations that might be good partners, and also grant possibilities. So know that we'll be following up with you with those, and fellows, know that I may need to reach out to you for a couple of links of things, but I think I have most of what I need to put that together for our attendees. We're going to wrap up our very first Ramsden webinar. I really thank you for coming. It's been an adventure getting this set up, and I really thank all of these fellows who have gone out of their way on a Wednesday night to present their thinking and share some of their practice. And I hope that it inspired you and that you left with some ideas, knowing that I know you might need some concrete tools that I'll get to you as soon as I can. Okay. When we hang up, there'll be a short survey, and it will also come to you in an email in a couple of days. So at some point, either right after this webinar or in a couple of days, if you could fill out the survey, we plan to do follow-up webinars, and we'd love your feedback. So if you could give us that feedback, that would be great. And of course, if you want to be involved in some way, there's space in that survey to let us know. Our next monthly focus starts in March on the 2nd, and it will be about citizen science. And so we'd love to see you across our social media feeds so that you can check us out. We will be hosting another webinar, so keep your eye open, okay? Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this, and you'll get a video recording so you can rewatch or share with your friends. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.